account recorded in Acts 27 shows Paul as a prisoner, and it shows us what Paul did and said. What Paul did, what Paul said, ministered to these guys that were watching. And I just like, using the different perspective. Like if I was also a prisoner, or if I was an islander in Malta, and I'm watching this man who is sticking out like a sore thumb, right? He came out of the water positive. He's on this island positive. He's the only one that's excited about this whole situation. I'm watching this play out in front of me, and I'm just, what am I observing? Like I'm observing this man in this situation. What are some things that I see as I'm watching Paul? That's what I'm.
So which this is another reason why I love the deeper dives, right? Because what we're watching is God, right? God doesn't interact with you based on man's opinion of you. God doesn't interact with you based on man's positioning of you. God interacts with you based on the promise he gave to you. And that's what we are witnessing in that moment. Paul is absolute. So we ain't even got to the context, right? We haven't spent. We've spent very little time on the fact that Paul's actually a prisoner.
Right.
He's.
Yeah. Okay.
Which when we start to make that turn towards when Paul's voice becomes the leading voice, which represents God's voice, it no longer mattered. And that's the point, right? The point is, and we kind of touched on a little bit last week, that man, even though they didn't first follow his instruction, they didn't lose his leadership, right? Because God kept speaking to him as the leader, although he was positioned as the prisoner.
Yes.
But because he kept leading, even though he was qualified as a prisoner, that thing turned around.
Yeah.
And that's such an inspirational point for us as leaders, is to see how Paul lived out his leadership. Right? Because Paul had to lead in some of the most adverse conditions. Some people are like, oh man, I got some bad members. I got some bad staff. I got some bad whatever. I got some bad kids. I got some bad whatever. Do you see the situations in which Paul had to lead? And this is such a great, I know we were talking about at the beginning, right? Because most of what we read is Paul leading people through letters.
Yeah.
But in Acts 27, we get to see Paul leading people in life. Which is a different perspective.
Right.
We actually get to see Paul engaged with people. And I'm like, it's so amazing to see like how Paul stayed true to the word of God in his mind in these situations. Like,
I want to make this connection for them. So what you just said, so in Acts 27, or actually throughout Acts, we get to see Paul live out some principles that we also see in the letters.
Yes.
And you pulled some out, right?
Yeah.
Some of the most popular, famous Paul statements,
Yeah.
Paul quotes. We get to see him live that out.
see it live out.
On Malta.
You see it.
That's good.
You see it. Before he even gets to Malta, right? You get to see Paul like, that man was ice cold, right?
Yeah.
Like he was embodying what he would later pen.
Right.
Right. You're watching him.
That's
like,
good. That's
this
good.
brother is like.
So when he says, I've learned how to be content in all situations, it's like,
he's like
learned that,
like,
right?
Some people think that he's talking about prison, just solely prison.
Right.
No, like this brother has
experience.
no.
Right.
Right. And then it was so rich, right? Which, like I said, we haven't got there, but I just to tag at that point, right? But we're watching Paul lead, right? But what is his leadership? His leadership is to remain a voice of hope. Right? When Paul, which wasn't right, Paul wasn't on the boat as a leader. He was amongst the prisoners.
Yeah.
And it was shown, right? Paul's just a preacher. No wonder why they didn't follow his nautical advice, right? Why we gonna fire like Paul? Like,
that's good.
Which to me is, man, like what What a picture, right? But they never lost his leadership.
Right.
They never lost it. And that's the part that is so, I believe, is a note that God wants us to pull out of there as leaders. Like, you don't get the privilege of retracting your leadership because your voice represents God's influence on the situation. Right. And we talked about this first, right? There was an audience too. And we talked about earlier, right? To the disciples that I love it when we talked about they went to the other side, that they said the other boats followed. Like there was an audience.
That's right.
Like there was an audience to Paul's behavior. There was an audience to Paul's responses. And of course, we get on the island. Once you get on the island, you see Paul, like the first thing that happens is Paul gets bit by a snake, right? And there's another audience, and they're like, what's happening?
Watching.
Right? But then he didn't die.
Right.
And they're like, this dude must be a god, right? Like there was like, and I'm like, Paul's probably like, man, I'm just,
yeah. I'm doing what I'm doing,
I'm
and
just
all
doing what
y'all,
I'm
y'all
doing.
being blessed and
Y'all
benefiting
just,
from
I'm
what's
just
happening.
getting to Rome.
You said that Paul provides a voice of hope.
Yeah.
And that was a message that you brought up on Sunday. And before you said what you said about hope, you kind of framed it like, hey, I'm just going to hit this point and keep on moving. But we got stuck there. I mean, that turned into a moment. Come on, you probably didn't have the time to go in at that moment, but now you do.
You see, I feel like we're in, right? But that's part of why we didn't get it on the island, right?
Right. Yeah.
But hope, right? So we were talking about hope in our effort, right? And that started the conversation that we started to talk about. Of course, it says after they had exhausted all efforts, they lost hope. And just another awesome point, right? The Bible is always speaking where it's like their hope was never supposed to be in their effort.
Right.
And in how,
That's right.
that was just another, for some an introduction, but for many, a refresher, right? A refresher as believers.
Right.
Our hope should never be in our effort.
Right.
And it's like, just a refresher, right? A refresher, like, oh, okay, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. I forgot that.
I've been trying to work this.
I forgot this, right?
Right.
I forgot that. And to me, the beauty of the moment was like God's perspective of it all. God's perspective was like I'm just watching God witness it, right? To me, I'm watching God witness it, and God's like, okay, you're not gonna listen to me. Okay, you're gonna try everything you can. Okay.
I feel like pulling something out right there.
Yeah.
So, because we're talking about hope.
Yeah.
And I think that moment was so refreshing because we define hope as a confident expectation of good. We're looking at this situation, and hope says this is going to turn out well.
Yeah.
We're not talking about the results yet. We're not talking about what's actually produced.
Yeah.
We're talking about in it, I'm projecting positivity. I'm projecting that this is going to be good. Yeah. That's hope. And me having hope, my seeing this turning out good is not based on my effort. It's based on what God said. Yeah. So I'm not even at the product or the final result yet. I'm just talking about me seeing that this is going to turn out good. It's not based on my effort. It's based on what God said. Yeah.
Which even to dig into that, right? We're saying hope is a product of focusing on the right thing.
Yes.
And it's amazing, right, that so many pieces, right, so many pieces of this sermon series are honestly positioned as options, right? That's another option.
That's good.
Like hope is a product of you focusing, on the good, in the bad.
Yeah.
What does that say to me? That means that like I can also not focus on the good.
That's right.
And I will not have hope.
Right.
Right. And but what is hope? Right. Hope. Like it's a confident expectation of good. And I just always like to just tell that on the fact that we are talking about how you experience.
That's good.
this. Like we are talking about the determining factor, unless you start to allow hope, which we'll get to, allow the lack of hope to decide to determine the decisions you make. And that's what we even started that trail to say, no, we don't allow our feelings to dictate the decisions we make, right? Because that's now that is the moment, right? And that's what we've been kind of building that trail. Like, nah, like it's even when I feel weak, God is strong, right? So I'm gonna keep doing this good, right? Even when I don't know what to do, I'm going to keep pursuing God because that's good, right? The end goal, which we know the end goal, right? We kind of talked about last week. The end goal is to mount such an argument through worry to get you to quit,
Right.
and because that's the end all be all,
Right.
right?
The only way I can lose
is quit.
is quit.
It's quit. And so all of this is trying to stack to get you to quit. But we got to realize that hope is a product of focus, and you choose what you focus on.
That's good.
You choose what you focus on.
Yeah. And that's one of the places that Paul was very clear. Last week we talked about there are places where we see Paul giving us a mindset, and then there are places where Paul gives us this is what this mindset will produce.
Yeah.
And so he tells us like what to focus on. Think on things that are above, whatsoever is lovely, peaceful, all of these.
And it's so funny, right? You're saying that, and it's almost like even now, right? I hear people say that, and it's almost like they receive it as abstract, as if like, I heard what you said, Paul, but come on, brother, that can't be like.
Based on what's in front of me.
Yeah, like, bro,
Yeah.
that's lofty.
Yeah.
You know, that's out there. And Paul's like, no, that's kind of it. You have to think on these things.
Yeah.
Because these things feed the good.
Yeah.
These things feed God's good. These things, man,
it was so real to Paul. Even it was so real in that, and I think because we are where we are now, and it's only we not really on the history or the feelings that they felt in this moment when these things were happening, but just he's talking to and he's living in a time where these people, I don't want to use any abstracts, right? Yeah. Paul himself and the people that he's talking to and serving with are being persecuted. Like they have real danger, real threat. Arrest is real. Death is real. Being taken from your family is real. These things are happening. This is real danger. So when Paul says to someone, listen, in this real situation that is not abstract, this is a real situation, think on the things that Jesus has secured for you. Love, peace, joy, soundness, these things. This is a real to-do. This is how you escape this current situation.
And man, when you start saying that, I'm like, man, I think we even might go back and still do some more surgery in understanding like it's not abstract.
Yeah.
Like, could you imagine, right? These are prisoners. These are prisoners. And I'm just sitting there like, now in this moment, like, man, that is incredible for the message to be God out of his goodness has saved you.
Yeah.
Like, we're talking to cast outs. We're talking to people who have been identified for doing wrong.
Yeah.
Like, the message of God's grace is so overwhelming, right? And we see that picture, and I believe that was the clarity that I believe that's why the detail was given that when Paul did get bitten by the snake, that their first reaction was he's just got what he deserved. Their first reaction was like, man, so just to paint the picture clear, right? These men, even when they arrived on the island, were viewed as bad.
Yeah.
Paul included.
Yeah.
Paul included. They were all viewed as bad. And to see how the goodness of God reflected itself and showed up,
Man.
is just such a picture of the expectation we can have
Yeah.
of God's good. Because you are talking about God saving prisoners.
Yeah. That's good.
You are literally talking about
Wow.
God showing justice and redemption for those who have been found to be wrong.
That's good.
Wow.
That is powerful.
Wow. God in his goodness has saved you. And of course we know Paul then even some of the sailors, some of the crew of the ship wanted to kill him. Like they wanted to off him. And the guy was like, nah, we can't touch Paul.
That's
right. Once again, showing that separation that no, Paul was on this boat as a prisoner. Paul was identified in this moment as someone who was not good.
Right.
And it's just amazing to me of how enriching that is to our lives to understand, man, how God will turn a situation around, how God will radically reverse a situation, right? And how, man, of course, they actually give us the day count so you can kind of see, right? Within 3 days, like, I know we kind of had that moment during service, like it's amazing how God can flip a whole situation around, right? Within 3 days, they're on this beach being catered to. The crazy part, they were being catered to as prisoners. These people even knew it, but it was like they kept like that's of course we have the point, right? There's care in spite of carelessness, right? These folks were getting fed, right? Like as prisoners.
That's good news.
Yeah.
That adds value to our. I'm looking to do these things not just for me, not just because it's going to benefit me, but it's going to benefit other people. Like Paul staying true to the faith, contending for the faith didn't just benefit Paul, but it benefited the prisoners, the guards, and all of the people that were on the island.
And that, to me, that's that most blessed, right?
Yeah.
Where, man, when we start to realize and see, like it's right there in front of us, how, man, people who were just surrounded or involved or around people blessed by God, how everybody lived fruitful. Everybody, I'm just imagining, like, I of course, sometimes I get caught up in scripture. I'm like these prisoners probably like, we don't want to leave this island. Now Paul trying to get to Rome, but I think we good. Right? I think we good right here.
That's funny.
On Malta.
Yeah.
And, of course, I would have been, it'd been awesome to see, right? It's hard for me not to believe that people, some of these prisoners didn't get saved as a result of Malta. That obviously we know the whole island got healed as a result of Paul landing on Malta.
Yeah.
Right? So
isn't that's amazing. So 270 something people. Plus
which is
a lot of folks.
It's a lot of folks.
Whole island of Malta.
Yeah.
All the sick get healed.
All the sick get healed.
Wouldn't have happened if Paul was in a hurry.
No.
And one of the points that I'm sure if you had more time to sit in that just met a need on Sunday was the point about keeping God's pace.
Yeah.
Right? And, I think it was only reason you're worried is because you left the pace.
Yeah.
Bringing that into the perspective, can you talk to us more about that? What does pace have to do with peace?
Yeah. Pace and peace are well, first, let's say it like this, right? Let's not view God's pace as the only thing it does is get you to what God promised.
Okay.
I believe that so underscores, right? That so devalues why God sets pace, right? And I think that as long as we're only looking at it as pace just determines when I get what God promised, we really, really undervalue the power that's available in His space. The Bible tells us that God has prearranged things, good things, for us to experience. And in that route, a part of God's pace is good things that He's promised. You know, experiences. We're gonna get into this later part, right? The journey, the for the ups and the downs of it. But just there's so much life in God's pace. But one of the pieces, and we just touched on that Sunday, one of the things that is prearranged, a part of God's pace, is God's peace.
Yeah.
You know, it's like God has people, God has touch points, God has experiences that are part of His pace that keep us in His perfect peace. Right? It just it's prearranged, and just wanted to take a moment to really simplify why some people might be experiencing worry. You know, is that worry is the result, right? It's the result of leaving God's pace, right? You, because a part of God's pace is God's peace. And I know many people as another. That's another point, right? That's another point to where we're saying, you know, what do I want to choose? Do I want to choose peace, or do I want to choose progress?
Right.
Right. And for Paul, we see how Paul chose peace, not progress. Right. Like, and I'm saying that in a literal, just trying to make it as real as possible. Because although Paul knew he had to go to Rome, which I would mirror that to, you know, there's things God wants to do with your life. Paul, however, he wasn't on the side of them going, right? And he didn't, best way to say it, he didn't frustrate grace, right? He didn't take God's grace for advantage and just say, nah, God promised Rome. So whether or not I'm saying to you guys that God's saying that we shouldn't go because of this storm, it's irrelevant because God said Rome. And that type of thought process, that type of approach is how someone leaves God's pace, right? They're like, nah, God told me that I was, you know, whether it may be a business, it may be a relationship, it may be a move to another city, and just, you know, you got that, and then you just went, and and you know, you're like, now you're experiencing worry in that place, and it's simple. You just left the pace.
Yeah.
And a lot of times what people do is they believe that they just missed it. They start to take it places that they weren't supposed to take it.
Yeah.
All you did was leave the pace, right? And so I believe that you know, Paul was at peace because he followed the pace, even though the pace took him to places he didn't think he would be.
Right.
But it's clear that God had purpose there.
Yeah.
Right, which is honestly one of the ending notes to the message, is which I believe is, you know, now I'm going way ahead, right? So I believe there's two things that bring peace to a believer: their gift being used and their needs being met. That's it. Like, God just want my gift to be used and my needs to be met. And we see Paul leaving that island with his gift being used and his needs being met.
That's good.
And
that's good. But now, that's a good place. Yeah. That's a good place. And to go back to the pace part, right? So you said something earlier that it's important for us to disconnect pace from the destination. Or is it we got to disconnect pace from the prize or the reward? We've been conditioned to think pace has all to do with the reward, right? Pace
Yeah.
determines me getting this prize. So if I speed it up, I get to the prize earlier. But pace, the way that God uses pace, is not connected to this reward, but to your development. And I think while you're talking, because the reward is already guaranteed. Like God isn't dangling the carrot in front of you.
Yeah.
The reward is going to be there, but pace determines your condition when you get to the reward.
And that is, and I believe that's, you know how I love to, like, not just say something without hearing from God as clear as I can, to even give tangible walkaways. And I believe that those were the two things that grounded Paul in the pace that he was in. I believe at every turn he realized my gift is being used and my needs are being met. Like, my gift is being used and my needs are being met. Like, it's like I'm on this boat, we were supposed to go here.
That's good.
But is my gift being used and are my needs being met? Is my gift being used or my needs being met? That keeps you on God's pace, right? Right? If you might feel like you should move to New York, and if you are a little uncertain about it, before you make that move, ask yourself right where you are, is my gift being used and my needs being met? Right? You know, it's just two simple points to keep you from stepping outside of God's pace, because a part of God's pace is God's peace. And sometimes I know you've seen this before, right? People feel like they're called to go here, called to go there, and it's like, you're being used right here, and you have your needs are being met. Like, why are you trying to work to get to what God has promised? Like, God works you to get there. Like, God, what part of, going back to another point, we'll touch on it too, right? We already kind of touched on it, right? But at what point did you believe your effort was a part of this? Because, right, you do realize that's the recipe, right? To ended up in a hopeless spot is starting the process of thinking that your effort is necessary for what God promised, right? That would eventually end in hopelessness.
That's good.
If you start the pattern of believing your effort is necessary to get you to what God promised, right? And I say it like this because I can't leave it out there by itself, because it's Pastor Brian saying do nothing. Absolutely not. But what I am saying is you should never be at a point where you see things one for one, right? You should never be at the point to, and this is what I mean by your effort. By your effort, I'm saying that what you put in matches what you get out of it.
Right.
No. That's self-effort. Self-effort is when what I put in it is what I get out of it, right? I believe that we're all a part of an incredible supernatural process in our lives, to where, because of Jesus, we always get more than we put in.
Yeah.
We always get more than we put in. And so Pastor Brian is a very diligent, hard worker, right? But I always get more out than I put in. And that lets me know that I'm not being moved. I'm not being grown by my effort, but I can always see, no, this is God doing this. Although I'm still working, what the results speak are greater than the effort I'm giving. And I tell you this all the time, that I believe believers should slow down the moment that the outcome matches the input, right? Because you are now starting a process that could end in a hopeless place, because you believe it's your effort that's necessary for what God's doing.
That's good.
And so, I can't. That's one of the ones I hate to leave it out there, right? Every time you use the word self-effort, like, you can't just leave it out there, right? Anytime you say your effort, you can't just leave it out there. So that, y'all got a whole completeness, right? We're not saying do nothing. We're just saying it should never be one for one. If it is one for one, stop. Stop right where you are. If you feel like everything you see is a result of what you have produced as a believer, you need to stop and say, hold up.
Yeah.
Am I creating this space?
Mm-hmm.
I don't care if you feel that peace in that moment, right? No, you need to stop and be like, am I creating this space? Because if it's one for one,
Right.
where did I leave God?
Yeah. That's good.
Because like I may be further along, but at some point I left God because it should never be one for one.
That's good.
Right? When God's involved, man, there's supernatural impact to the effort you give. To where like I'm still working, but I can't explain how this is. And I'm gonna use an example, right? That it's actually a true story, right? We were talking about it beforehand, but it's like, oh man, you know, and I hear this all the time. People will buy houses, and they're like, man, I believe this is what the house guy showed me.
Yeah.
And without any effort of those, you may have saved, you may have did all this, but then you're like, this thing is worth more. Right. What are you watching? You're watching. It ain't one for one, bro.
Right.
Right. Like you can't even. Like God's like, nah, I'm with you.
It's more good than you know.
That's more good than you know.
Yeah.
And it's like, I didn't even know. Like you'll just have that response, like, I didn't even know it was this good. That's God showing you're we're on pace. We're on pace. But when you start seeing one for one,
wow.
like, wait.
Yeah.
Like, wait. This was way too normal for God's involvement. I think that's rich. It sounds so simple, but we should get to the points where it's like, this is way too normal for God to be involved.
Yeah.
And of course we're saying, right? So once again, man, I'm loving so much about this message, right? We're saying that's a point of review. We're not saying it's a point of absence.
Right. Right.
We're just saying that's where you stop.
Yeah. It's another indicator.
It's an indicator.
Yeah.
Stop. Why? Because if I continue this without...
That's right.
Wait, so there was another note in there, right? Worry unchecked will lead to hopelessness, right? When worry's left unchecked. It's left unchecked, no, you check that worry, right? You got to check it, right? And then say the same thing on the other side of it, like, no, you need to check that progress, right? You need to check that worry, right? And make sure this worry ain't the result of leaving God's pace, right? This progress is good, but is this progress in God's pace? Because if it may be good, but if God's not a part of it, eventually it will lead to worry.
Yeah.
Eventually it will lead to a lack of peace.
Yeah.
It may be really good. But man, it's heading for an avalanche.
Yeah, that's good.
Because get this, right? There's one thing I love, right? When we start to, this is so rich, right? And you see it in the account, right? When you start to attend to what God has revealed, He's gonna bring it back to what He planned.
That's good.
And I think that's a part of what people feel that they don't really understand, right? Like God I think we said it earlier in the piece, right? But God's not a co-signer; He's a co-laborer. And many people they get frustrated because they're continuing asking God to co-sign what they did, and God's like, "No, tear it down, build again." Tear it down, build again, and they're like, I don't want to tear nothing down. And God's like, you gotta understand, as you're listening to me, like I'm literally breaking it down to what it's supposed to be. And sometimes that means backwards to us, but backwards to us ain't backwards to God, right? You know, it may feel backwards to you, but it ain't backwards to God. God's like, I'm building it better. I'm building it to last. And most often, right, that I think that's the part that gets most people is they're like, man, I started to attend to what God is saying, and He started telling me to get rid of stuff. Like, oh yeah, He's bringing it back to where it's supposed to be.
That's good.
Like,
you know, you had some leadership points that you're pulling out, particularly here in the deeper dive, and so that's applicable to even to leaders as you are working with other people, understanding that even the part that they play has to be in God's pace, and giving room for God to develop them in that pace. Like, you know, I'm thinking about a leader who is, you're looking at someone, you're expecting them to produce at a certain level or whatever, but understanding that they're working in God's pace too. So there may be a point in their progress where they're having to make adjustments based on God's pace for them. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is like,
or a parent with a child, same, you know.
And I go back to kind of a week one, right? God doesn't call it good because it felt good. God calls it good because it served its purpose, right? And I believe that that's where that scenario comes in, to where it's like, we call it good most often because it progressed.
Right.
And in leadership, that's a hard one to avoid, right? Because everyone wants to feel as a leader that they're growing it. But God doesn't call it good because it grew. God calls it good because it served its purpose. And the purpose may have been something needed to just be exposed. I've been a part of some of the most incredible leadership advancement in my life were moments of exposure, not growth. Like, I just got exposed to something. And I'm so thankful that the people that were leading me were mindful enough to know that progress ain't always the goal.
That's good.
Like, you just needed to see this. And we got to a moment where we saw it.
Yeah.
And it was like, man, exposure was the wind. You know, exposure was the wind, right? I heard this other day, and I believe it to be true, right? And this is Pastor Brian just sharing, right? But I believe it to be true. But they were saying that people learn twice as fast after a loss than they do a win.
Yeah.
And I can say for me, right, that's true, man. Like, Pastor Dollar, he would always say this, right? He would always say, man, the best lessons have always been the most expensive ones. And I'm saying this because we were talking about leadership and how singular leadership is sometimes, in thinking that progress is the only win. And here's the thing, like, it's progress to them.
That's
right? But for God, purpose is always the win. Was the purpose served? Was the purpose served? I'm pretty sure. Man, just to bring it back over here, right? The boat that was crashed, someone paid for it, right? It wasn't a free boat.
Right.
Right? And I'm saying this to say that while we're reading this like, oh man, and Paul landed on this island and the glory of God got revealed and he healed all of these people on this island, and Paul got a new boat to go to Rome. At the end of the day, they crashed a boat somebody paid for.
Yeah.
Right? To the person
Yeah.
who lost the money on the boat.
Right.
It's like, and y'all, somebody
failed.
Somebody on there said not to go.
Right. Right.
Like somebody said not to go. We lost the whole boat.
Yeah.
They're like, but it was good.
Yeah.
Right? It was good. Right? And Paul's like, but it was good. And at the end of the day, God looked at it and was like, oh, y'all lost a boat. Who cares? It served its purpose, right? And I'm saying that to say that, like, no, like somebody in this scenario, which of course we don't know, I imagine it would, if they're going to Rome, right? I imagine, I don't know, maybe the government paid for the boat. I don't know who paid for the boat. I'm just simply saying, if was the loss, if the loss of money, like, man, I've seen a lot of people like, man, I lost money, so this couldn't have been purposeful, right? This couldn't have served in God's good, right? And it's like, well, there goes the snare right there. They crashed the whole boat, did a whole lot of good for God. Like somebody, at the end of the day, somebody paid for that boat.
Yeah.
Right?
That's good. That's good.
Anyway.
That's good, and I think it applies to many situations. Many people can connect to that. Obviously, there's some leaders that'll watch the deeper dive and be blessed by what was just said. And it was rich.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Pastor Brian. Thank you for your time.
Yes,
and thank you all for being with us, and look forward to seeing your comments in the chat. Looking forward to seeing you next Tuesday.
Yes.
Next Tuesday, oh my goodness, we don't know what's going to happen, right? Because this coming weekend, this is Resurrection Weekend, right?
It is.
So, man, look forward to seeing you there. Till then, be blessed. Today is a good day to have a good day.